But also to bring up classic Chop anecdote where we were finishing our set in Davis, California, and somebody came up and dropped a note at my feet, and it just said, "Dear band, you suck."
I do remember that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of 1001 Album Complaints. It's the show where lifelong friends, musicians, complainers, and music fans tell the stories behind the albums from the list of the 1001 albums you must hear before you die. So we're going to give you some history, some context on the artist and album. We'll dive into the songs, and we'll also be dropping in clips along the way, so don't worry if you've never heard a single note of this album. We're going to be dropping them in for you. Now, as musicians, we know how hard it is to write and record music, and we've got nothing but respect for anybody who has the guts to do that as well, but at the same time, it's fun to nitpick the things you love. So just a warning, we're probably going to poke some fun at today's album. Now, at the end of all this, we're going to vote on whether or not you actually need to hear this album before you die, and then we'll randomly select next week's album. I want to thank you for picking us to spend some time with, and this week we're going to dive into the music of a blues singer and guitar player who cruised just below the surface of stardom for almost 20 years, oftentimes living in the shadow of other more commercially successful peers like Linda Ronstadt. And I'll let our friend Robert Christgau chime in at this point. Quote, "At various times, I've felt more passionate about the joy of cooking, Bette Midler, Joni Mitchell, but Bonnie's the one I always come back to." My name is Adam. I've been playing music since I was 12 years old and played professionally for over a decade. And today we're talking about the album that earned Bonnie Raitt 4 Grammy Awards in one night. And that is the 1989 album Nick of Time. So let's start things off by playing some of the title track from the album. This week, some soft rock jams right there. If you're some flashbacks to the dentist office, that's all good, don't worry. So we're going to throw it around the studio now and get introductions from our crew by way of a tweet-length review of this album. So let's throw it over to Phil first.
Hey guys, what's up? Good to hear from you this week. So, take the smoky, smooth Southern soul, vocal. You take the timeless, pitch-perfect slide guitar playing. Can you ruin this combo? Well, let's see what producer Donald Fagen's son, that's right, produced by Donald Fagenson, otherwise known as Don Was. Let's see what he can do with it.
All right. It's a challenge accepted. All right, let's throw it over to Rob next.
I'm already nervous about how this will be received in the future, whatever we're about to say here, because we are clearly the wrong people to go about reviewing this album. But okay, I'm excited to hear the story. Here is my tweet-length review. Blander than cottage cheese and whiter than a Slipknot concert. Bonnie Raitt, late 80s her way through a career resurgence with a lot of help from GarageBand's preset for Rock Beat 1.
Boosh. Whoa.
Oh, shit.
All right, we're going to end it here tonight. We want to thank you. We'll throw it over to Rob for the mailbag and next week's album. All right, this is Adam, everybody. I'm going to be taking us through this album, but my tweet review is Bonnie Raitt's midlife crisis is timeless. It worked on baby boomers in the 90s, and it worked again on me this week. So, fellas, I'm quitting my job. I'm starting a micro distillery in my basement. I've started smoking my own meats, and I will most certainly be blaring this album in the brand new Dodge Charger I bought yesterday.
Wow.
But all right, well, so, right, not necessarily the most qualified to hit this album, but what were your general impressions? How was your week?
I think we should get it out of the way right now. What I was alluding to, which is this is one of those records I really want to like and praise. And Bonnie Raitt seemed, I'm sure you're going to tell a really cool story about this album from the little tidbits I read, the research I did do. I think it's an interesting story, and I love a good story. And she seems cool as hell.
She is.
Super chill.
Yep.
So I respect her, certainly. But this was very unpalatable to me for a lot of reasons. I think it's mostly the producer's fault, which is what Phil indicated. It's the 80s fault. You know, it really falls victim to so many 80s tropes. Like, where is that freaking guitar? It's barely in there.
I
and
know.
that seems like it should be her magic weapon, right?
And the Doogie Howser style keyboards that are, completely throughout the entire album. I know. It's rough. It was 89. We got to keep that in mind, gents. We got to keep that in mind.
But even there, it feels more backward looking than it feels forward looking. You could have told, if this had happened in 84 or something, maybe I could be more forgiving of it. So I'm just acknowledging that I know we're supposed to praise this. I think this is one of those records that retrospectively has a lot of praise online, but it does not hold up very well. Certainly it's not made for people like us, which we've already acknowledged.
Sure.
There's some good songs, but yeah, the production really weighed it down.
Yeah, it's slathered in that like Bruce Hornsby thing, right? That's like maybe cool for one song when it pops on the radio. When I saw that we were doing Bonnie Raitt this week, I was excited. I love the early Bonnie Raitt. I guess like it's probably like her self-titled, like the early stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's like it's easy to say that about anybody, right? It's easy
Totally.
to be like, oh, I like the early stuff. Felt like I gave it through like the first minute and a half of the first song. Like waiting. It was like I could feel the tension building, and then I was like, oh man, I know exactly where this is going. This is like my 4th grade summer babysitter, just like jamming out to this.
I listened to 5 or 6 of her earlier albums this week. And while she's not a guitar virtuoso, there are aspects of her that I fell in love with. So first up is her voice. I think her voice is like silk. Even when she's doing blues stuff, it's just perfect. It's beautiful. I think there were moments where she shined vocally on this album, but yeah, the producer, again, when it came to her guitar work, I mean, just drowned out everything. There were moments where I said to myself, like, why even bother? Like, just play the chords over this part. Because it's almost insulting that you have her this deep, this buried in the mix.
Or you're calling this section a solo, presumably, on the chart. But there's almost nothing going on. It just feels like a disservice to her. And yeah, just to add sideways praise to the pile, I also listened to the first record this week, the self-titled one from the 70s. And that is way cooler.
I know.
Way cooler.
Yeah.
And so I think what I'm going to mostly be expressing today is disappointment. And actually, I'll tell you the truth. Of course, I've heard her name through the years. I've heard some of these hit songs. But she really came on my radar as someone to listen to, Adam, when a couple years back we were compiling our Glaring Omissions episode, and you first brought her up. It didn't end up making the show. You ended up picking Indigo Girls, I think. But you mentioned that very first self-titled record, and I went and listened to it just as a result of us talking about it on the text chain.
Well, I appreciate that.
I mean, what do you want me to say? I like the 70s better. But I even took a listen to her 2022 record, and that has a lot more energy and back to it than this one does as well.
Well, Rob, I'm impressed that you actually listened to something I mentioned, because generally I just ignore everything you say. So I appreciate. No, I also had a note that this, the Midlife Crisis album. And so I like to play with numbers here. So this album came out in 1989. I was 9 years old. My father, a baby boomer, was probably around the same age as Bonnie Raitt and the same age that I am now. So as I was listening this week, I was looking at my kids, I was thinking through my father's eyes as he saw the world at my age and how he was watching his own parents' age, and now I'm watching my parents' age. So needless to say, I cried a couple times this week listening to that first track, which we'll get into, because I'm an over-emotional wreck. So
with Tom out this week, then you're taking up the crying torch, eh?
Right, exactly.
Did you listen to the same record as me? Did I listen to the right record?
I am also confused. It's hard to imagine wringing any emotion out of it. Listen, I have some compliments for this as we go along. However, yeah, that is surprising.
There's a Don Henley solo record that has like a special spot in my heart. So
there you go. Maybe
I
that's
see how it's objectively bad.
Yeah. Right.
So.
I'm going to make my case here for Bonnie Raitt. All right.
As I'm glad you're going to, Adam, but that's just to bring it all home to the listeners, to the Bonnie Raitt fans who are listening, who've I'm sure already shut this off. Is it essential? That's a much higher bar.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's what I'm coming in concerned about, but I'm willing to hear you out, Adam.
All right. So let's dive into the history. So this week I read a book, a biography called Bonnie Raitt, Just in the Nick of Time by a guy named Mark Bigo. And so now we're going to start the story, though, way back, about 50 years before the birth of Bonnie Raitt. And we're going to go back to November 1st, 1898 in Jefferson County, Arkansas, where a woman named Sippy Wallace was born. So Sippy Wallace plays an integral part of the Bonnie Raitt story, from her main inspiration to start playing music to the inspiration for a lot of her nonprofit work.
She eventually trademarked and made her riches off of that plastic cup for kids, right?
Right. What is... Oh, man. Good night, folks. That's it for us. So Sippy Wallace is this old blues musician. She moved to Texas as a child. She started singing and playing in her church's choir. She gets married, moves to Chicago, and she starts recording blues music in, get this, 1923. So these are the old recordings where the hiss on the record is sometimes louder than the performance itself. But just for some fun context, we're going to drop in a clip of one of those really early. So Sippy Wallace was actively recording until 1929, and then she basically became a singer and a pianist in a Baptist church for like 40 years. She was eventually coaxed out of retirement by another old blues singer, and in 1966...
For 1 second, I thought you said coked out of retirement.
That might have been the only thing that got her on stage in the 60s.
I want to be coked out of retirement. That's a life goal now, Phil.
Tarnishing this woman's reputation, Phil. My God.
Sorry.
She cut an album in 1966 called Woman Be Wise at the age of 68. You see, it's never too late. So I'm planning my big hit in about 24 years, and I'm going to write that masterpiece album. All right. So you guys set your calendars, set an Apple calendar reminder. All right. Now we're going to jump forward to Bonnie Raitt. Okay. It's November 8th, 1949. She is born in Burbank, California. Bonnie Lynn Raitt.
Wow. Such blues credentials over there.
I was going to say, she's got a Scottish background. She was not from the Mississippi Delta or Texas, which I kind of always assumed when you hear these blues singers, but she is totally a Southern California girl. She was the middle of an older brother and a younger brother, and she grew up a tomboy. Her mother was a piano player, pretty accomplished, and her father was a big Broadway star, a guy named John Raitt, who was huge in Broadway in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard that name. I didn't know this was her father.
Yeah, her father. And I think Carousel was his big musical that he was known for, that he kind of made his stardom in.
Oh, nice. You'll Never Walk Alone. It's a jam.
So music was omnipresent in her house as a kid, but in a familiar turn of touring musicians, John Raitt toured the country with theater groups, and her mother had to give up her dream of being a musician and stayed home to raise the kids. And to hear Bonnie talk about it, she held some animosity for her father because he was never around. And more so, she was angry that her mother went unappreciated for everything that she did. So music was the family business, so it's not a huge surprise that Bonnie got into that. Her parents really, really pushed her and encouraged her to get into it. And growing up, Bonnie was in awe of her father from the time that she was able to even realize that he was a musician. That was his job, and she was mesmerized by that idea. But along with being enamored with her father, she quickly became disillusioned with him because he was gone a ton. He wasn't around enough to be a real father. Now, later she'd come to appreciate how hard it was to do what he did, but she eventually learns that touring itself is kind of like an addiction.
Touring, rambling, pretty much the same thing.
Gotta ramble, gotta tour, yes. So Bonnie gets her first guitar as a Christmas gift in 1957 at 8 years old, and it was a Stella acoustic guitar.
Love those things.
The Stellas
Classic.
are great. If you're looking to buy your kid a guitar, the Stella is a great choice.
Well, that one has resonance for us because Phil had that Stella for years and years. It was a little 3/4 size, or maybe even smaller than that, right? That kicked around all the rental houses in college, right?
Yes, correct. And it was definitely a little nuisance maker, but Tom particularly hated it.
Does it still survive to this day, or has
No,
it been...
Tom destroyed it
All right.
long ago.
Tom just hates joy. So
What's bringing joy? Let me destroy it.
He's like the Grinch at the beginning of the movie.
No redemption story. It's just him being an asshole, and then it ends. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, he just goes to the top of Crumpet, and everyone cries, and he goes great, and goes home and eats the candy.
gains power from their tears.
So she teaches herself to play, all self-taught. And it was really during the folk music revival of the late 50s and early 60s. So think of all the beatniks. She said that at 11 years old, she was wearing peace symbols and olive green pants with black turtlenecks and grew her hair out. So very young, she was into this scene. And she would go away to summer camp, again, during the same time of this big folk revival. And she was asked to start performing at her summer camp. So this was kind of her spark. Now, the absence of her father as she's growing up obviously doesn't help. Her father recounts that when she was 13, he was on the road, he'd come home, and she would cry to him and say, "You're never home. Why can't you be like other dads?" And this is heavy. He says, "You'll find out sometime that daddy has to go where his talent is wanted, and you'll find out that someday this happens in your life." Whoa. Because we'll find out later on that she never stops touring. I mean, she was basically playing gigs for, now it's probably been 55 years or something like that. Early on, she was convinced that she needed to save the world. Her parents were Quakers, she was a pacifist, and her parents were very political. So she grew up thinking that part of her career needs to be political at some point, but she's really got to save the world. That's kind of like her second mission.
Political Quakers? That's a thing?
Yeah, well, it might have just been the pacifistic, if that's a word, the pacifist act,
Okay, fair enough.
So maybe more just like anti-war, pro-peace stuff. All right, so we've got a Scottish redhead, the daughter of a Broadway star living in the Hollywood Hills in California. So how the hell does she get into the blues? Well, the magical album that changed her life was around 14 years old, and she heard Blues at Newport 1963. And it was on this album that she hears John Lee Hooker, Sonny Terry, Mississippi John Hurt, a ton of other blues legends, but there was also this guy named John Hammond Jr. that stuck out the most to her because he played slide. She absolutely loved that sound. She thought the slide sounded like a human voice, like it was taking a guitar and making it into a human voice. And her grandfather also played lap steel. So it reminded her of that sound. So she, at an early age, starts kind of gravitating toward that slide sound. And at 15, she starts playing slide. Now, at the same time, she goes to the Troubadour, and they have an amateur night once a week. And she and a friend get up and start playing, and this is kind of like her first gigs. Now, unlike a lot of other stories, there's no big record execs there. She doesn't get picked up by a label. But her family picks up in 1965, and they move out of California, and they move to Poughkeepsie, New York, and she goes to college at a place called Radcliffe in Massachusetts in 1967. So she starts going to college, and again, no big surprise, she starts putting most of her efforts into music, and she starts gigging because she's getting paid. And there was a quote where she said, "Once you get paid for doing something you love to do anyway, it's pretty hard to turn around and have to go back to school."
Well, I have a question. I was just wondering if you got any indication of, you're talking about 1965. This is boy band Beatles. This is Sunshine and Lollipops Beach Boys.
Pre-Woodstock.
Blues, pre-Woodstock, pre-electric blues generally, right?
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that blues music, although it had been around for quite some time and it had clearly influenced rock and roll and Chuck Berry and Little Richard and things like that, was it pretty niche to be a John Lee Hooker fan, for instance?
I think it probably was. And you're right, this is not electric blues. This is a lot of the acoustic-driven blues. So she falls in love with that album, basically starts covering it. And as she's doing gigs, again, it's niche enough that there was a record promoter, a blues promoter, who saw her at one of these small gigs. And I don't know if he just thought she was a novelty or actually really dug what she was doing, but he started putting her in front of some of these old Delta blues players as they started touring. So she was now opening for Buddy Guy. She's opening for Junior Wells. So
interesting. Well, yeah, no, because I think just to tie some strings together and just sound it out, my understanding had been, this is an oversimplification, but that the British invasion was sort of about British kids getting a hold of those American blues records at a time when American blues players were not really getting their due in America, and popularizing it in Britain and sort of repackaging it, sending it back to America via the British invasion, which then elevated their status.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so maybe she's doing this while that's going on over there, and it's still kind of simmering under the surface. Because we'll find out that she does go on to actually start a foundation where she raises money to pay for a lot of these old blues singers from the 20s, 30s, and 40s who basically got screwed out of money and had written all these songs. And she started a nonprofit to help, give some money back and to recognize a lot of these forgotten blues players.
No, that's really cool. And to be clear, not taking anything creatively away from these guys, but my understanding is it just wasn't that popular in America. Maybe that's part of why they were so accessible to her as a young musician, because it was a little more niche. And that when bands like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles kind of re-exported it back to America, then America started to pay more attention to that stuff.
Right. So it's around this time that she travels to Europe. I'm not sure why. It might have been for a one or two dates on a gig, but she was browsing around a record store in London and she stumbles across that 1966 release from Sippy Wallace. She's immediately enamored with Sippy Wallace. So Bonnie returns back home to Philadelphia after being in Europe for a little while. She immediately drops out of college and she starts gigging around Philadelphia, and she gets a slot opening for John Hammond Jr., her slide hero. And she also met a band called the Edison Electric Band and befriends their bass player, a guy named Freebo, who would play bass with her for like the next 20 years. So she and Freebo spend the next couple years as a duo, gigging up and down the East Coast and opening for guys like Taj Mahal. Again, she's kind of building this mini kind of cult following on the East Coast. But she's also starting to get noticed by some folks in the industry. And in the spring of 1971, she signed a deal with Warner Brothers, who at the time also had Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, and our favorite Randy Newman. These were the folks on the on the bill with Warner Brothers. So her first foray into the recording industry was just called Bonnie Raitt. Rob had mentioned it at the top. That was released in 1971, and she recorded it in the most rural setting she could find. It was the garage of an abandoned summer camp in Lake Minnetonka, Minnesota. And it was recorded on a 4-track, very ramshackle. The book that I read called it very homegrown, and she's 21 at the time. So that first album also just happens to have the song that my wife and I danced to at our wedding. It was our first dance song. It's a song called Thank You, and I'm going to drop a clip in here.
I left my life somewhere behind. Games I was trying left over my time. You came into my life almost like you knew. Time is running out, I can't run it home to you. You taught me how to love you, you helped me to believe. You could even love me, I was all you'd ever need.
And I did that, A, just because I friggin' love that song, but B, I think it's a good flavor of what Rob and I were talking about earlier, which is it's just cooler. It just has a real nice vibe.
Oh, that first record's great. And it's interesting to hear that was like, essentially, if I'm hearing you correctly, it was like a DIY situation.
Very.
Is that the one, was that written by Stephen Stills, or is that a different one?
No, so this song, Thank You, is actually written by her.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
okay.
one of her originals that she had written. Now, on that debut album, she also covered Mighty Tight Woman, the one that we played at the top, and another Sippy Wallace song called Woman Be Wise. And now this album didn't sell very much, and it didn't really crack the Billboard charts, but she was starting to build a small but loyal following, mostly through word of mouth. From the start, she was always kind of considered a musician's musician, somebody who could sing and play and perform like a pro. And in 1972, she appeared at the Ann Arbor Blues and Jazz Festival, and it's there that she met and performed with her idol, Sippy Wallace, for the first time. And that same year, she records her second album called Give It Up in June of 1972. So her sound continues to get refined over the course of these albums. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned it yet, but tonight's album is her 10th release. So I'm going to hit some highlights of those albums. I won't go super deep into it, or else we'll be here for 6 hours.
Can we just say that's already impressive? I mean, like I said, the story is a great story. She has persisted. She's still releasing records and touring to this day.
Yeah.
But the fact that you have a hit at record number 10.
Right, knocking on 40, your 10th album.
Knocking on 40, it's huge, and it deserves respect, sir.
I mean, she put out a record every year from 69 to 75.
Yeah.
And if you go and look at the record she put out in 1975, Home Plate, if you just look at the cover art, you'll understand why it took her 2 years to release the next record. This is a career killer.
It's pretty corny.
It's like a drawing of her sliding into Home Plate. It's insane. It's pretty awesome this even exists. I gotta find a bigger image of this.
Yeah, how the heck did that come out in the 70s? That's got real strong 80s vibes.
An 80s children vibe.
Right. It looks like a Nickelodeon show poster. Yeah.
Holy shit.
It's bizarre.
I'm going to buy this vinyl.
It's definitely a dollar bin classic.
Holy shit. It's a clip art. It's so awesome. Got a good look at it here now. Anyway, we can move on.
So her second album, Give It Up, entered the Billboard charts at 138, and it sold, a respectable 250,000 copies at the time of its release. And it's around this time as well that she starts to consider part of her mission in life and to use her music and her fame, well, a little bit of fame, as a vehicle for some of those old artists, the pioneers from the 20s and 30s who invented the blues but never really got their fair share or fair hearing, as she calls it. So she goes on at some point later in her career to be a founding member of the Rhythm and Blues Foundation. And they're the ones who do recognition and health benefits for all of these older, underappreciated blues artists.
So she started that early in her career, relatively.
Yes, in her 20s. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, it sometimes goes unnoticed. This is maybe a bad analogy, but it's like the professional athletes from the 1960s. They didn't make nearly as much money as the guys from now did. And, some of them in later life ran out of cash, but you can imagine what it was like for the Sun Houses of the world. Probably never got a payday.
Right.
Very noble cause.
So in 1973, she moves back to the West Coast where she meets and falls in love with a band called Little Feat. Are you guys at all familiar with Little Feat?
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't at all. I'd seen the name before and I went and listened to it. They're pretty badass. I'm not sure if they're on the list, but that would be one that I would look forward to if they were. So she gets in with them and subsequently starts drinking and partying like any other 24-year-old gigging musician should and does. And that same year, she records Taken My Time, and it's released in October of 1973, and she's touring nonstop. And it's at this point in her life that she realized she's turned into her father. She realizes what he was talking about. She's now addicted to performing and being on the road. A girl's got to ramble. So she's becoming very well known in music circles, but still no major commercial success, which she's okay with. And in 1974, Warner Brothers gives her a $10,000 allotment for her next album. Now, Warner Brothers says they'll give her the money, but the fourth album, they need a hit. They need a hit, and she's got to use a producer with a track record of hits. So for 1974 Streetlights, the producer Jerry Ragavoy steered her away from blues and more into the pop realm. And this is the first and only album that she's ever done where she doesn't play any slide guitar on any of the tracks. Now, that was released in September of 1974, and it made it to number 80 on the Billboard. Hey, she's doing all right. She keeps getting better and better. So from this point on, Bonnie drops the naive charm of those early albums and is really considered more of a pro at this point, but she's still not getting any radio play. So up next is 1975's Home Plate. Phil, you were just talking about that atrocious cover. It's her fifth studio album. Now, this is the same year that Linda Ronstadt releases Heart Like a Wheel, which was also her fifth album and was a raging success. The leading track on that was You're No Good. Everyone knows that song. So that's what Bonnie is competing with at this point. And that Linda Ronstadt album and that single went number one in the Billboard charts. So now Warner Brothers has in the back of their head that Bonnie is going to be the answer to Capitol's Linda Ronstadt. So for Home Plate, they gathered a who's who of musicians: Emmylou Harris, Jackson Browne, J.D. Souther, who we remember wrote a ton of those Eagles songs from those early Eagles albums. And everyone connected on this project was just sure this was going to be the big breakthrough. And guess what? It makes a bump. It peaked at number 43, but nothing huge. Bonnie's 25 at this point and still touring nonstop. Now, in 1976, she goes back into the studio again for album number 6. This one is called Sweet Forgiveness. It's released in 1977. She has a moderate single hit with a song called Runaway, Pretty solid rock tune. Robert Christgau liked it, although he did say, rock and roll nostalgia is an accepted way to getting a girl singer on the charts, as Bonnie's friend and rival Linda Ronstadt has proved more than once. All right, so that album was certified gold for around 500,000 records, and it peaked at number 25. All right, go Bonnie. You're looking better. We're moving up here. And we're going to flash forward now to 1979, and Warner Brothers has a producer named Peter Asher, who started working with Bonnie to really try to get that next big hit. Peter Asher, by the way, was the one who produced that killer Linda Ronstadt album. So Bonnie records and releases her 7th album called The Glow. And around the same time, she starts holding a bunch of charity and benefit gigs for a musician organization called Muse, which stood for Musicians United for Safe Energy. This was a big anti-nuclear power protest movement, and she was right at the forefront.
This is like 79. This is like Carter-Reagan election.
And right around the partial nuclear meltdown near Harrisburg, PA with...
dope, yeah.
What was it?
Yeah.
3 Mile Island.
Yeah. So out of that comes this big protest movement, and Bonnie is there just doing tons and tons of charity and benefit shows for this organization called Muse. All right, so now she's got this 7th album, The Glow. Warner Brothers did a big push for the album, and again, everyone is sure this is going to be the one that makes her a star. Surprise, it does okay. Not a ton of airplay, didn't sell well, only made it to 7-3 on the billboards. She's 30 years old.
She was nominated for a Grammy or is that...
She was, for Runaway. Yeah. She was nominated, but didn't win that year. So in 1980, she's getting kind of frustrated and decides to spend more time on her political stuff. But that doesn't last very long. So then she goes back into the studio. And in 1981, she self-produces an album called Greenlight, which is entirely rock and roll. Great critical success. Rolling Stone says it's her best album to date. Made it up to 32 on the Billboard. Doing pretty well. By the way, I love that as I'm reading this book, it's talking like this is not a successful career. Like she's got what? We're now on her 7th album, and 5 of them have made it into the top 100. That's remarkable.
She's been nominated for a Grammy. She's hanging out with all the cool guys. Like, yeah.
Right. Any musician would consider this like, I've made it.
Great.
Like, this whole thing, and I guess maybe retroactively when you look back, you're like, oh, well, you didn't make it to number 1, so you're shit. But my God, like, literally any musician would kill for a career like this.
But do people ever find the back catalog, if she doesn't put out, Let's give them something to talk about.
Good point.
Well, it's only because it's written with a retrospective look of where she went after that, right? I mean, it just goes to show you how there's always these next echelons of success. Just being a working musician is a huge success on its own, right?
All right, so at this time too, Bonnie starts raising money to make a documentary film about the then 83-year-old Sippy Wallace. All right, so at 33 years old, Bonnie was thrilled that she got some critical acclaim for Greenlight, but Warner Brothers was not impressed. So Bonnie goes back into the studio again, records another album that she was calling Tongue in Groove. She plays it for Warner Brothers. They hate it. They don't like it. They tell her to take it back into the studio, re-record a bunch of stuff, reproduce it. So she does that. She goes back into the studio, re-records a bunch of the songs, remixes it, and the day after she finished the rework, Warner Brothers drops her from their roster. And that's a great spot for our favorite segment here, which is Bonnie Raitt by the numbers. All right, we're going to start off with the number 18, and that is the number of studio albums that Bonnie Raitt has released in her lifetime, which is nothing to scoff at. That is pretty spectacular. Next up is the number 20. As in 20 million albums sold over her career, which spans over 50 years. 5 million. 5 million of those 20 million albums were for this album alone as of about 2019. Yeah, this one sold 5 million over the course of, 30 years.
Do we have any demographics on who bought this? Because it was not young people.
It was definitely not. She was aiming for that baby boomer crowd.
What is the modern equivalent of like Bonnie Raitt? Like what it resonates, what tugs at us that way? But it's also
it's like Blink 182's comeback tour or something.
Coldplay. I didn't love Coldplay, but they
kind of started that way too, but they've gotten even more that way. I mean, maybe an edgier answer would be something like the Black Keys. Like, are they really breaking new ground?
Yeah, I heard their new song. That was pretty history.
But no, but I mean, to me, it resonates because they still sound pretty good to me. But that's the point, right?
I remember I saw a comedian, it might have been in the early 2000s, and he was saying, when you're getting old, when elevator music sounds okay. And so, this is decent. I could listen to this.
Yeah, it's got some George Benson going on in here. Yeah.
All right, so now we're fully down the wormhole. I was in the coffee shop the other day, and there was just some like chill background music, and I was like, I know this song. What is this song? It was definitely like a Muzak version of the Sonic the Hedgehog song.
Oh, dude, that's awesome. Yes.
Like in the board, and I was like, holy shit.
There you go. You're 40.
But it was it was super Muzak-y. It was great. And I loved it.
That's great.
All right. The number 200, as in over 200, which is the number of benefit concerts she's done over her lifetime. Everything from cerebral palsy research to stopping nuclear proliferation to environmental causes to homelessness. The number 1 is the number of rap songs Bonnie has appeared on.
No.
Now, don't worry. This was for a celebrity song, like one of those We Are the World things, but it was called Sun City, which was trying to raise awareness about the apartheid in South Africa. And now it was 90s rap, which you had two guys like doing rip, rap, rip-a-doo-doo in the beginning, and then like 50 celebrities all like, we gotta make a change. It was pretty cringy. It's called Sun City. Go listen to it. We'll throw it on the playlist.
I love how ceaselessly she seems to be batting away our complaints with her good citizenship. Like, this is a good human being. She's better than me, certainly, and better than most.
And she clearly started putting in the work when no one was looking, like long ago. Like,
Exactly.
All right, our next number is the number 14. That's the number of record executives who passed on the chance to sign Bonnie in 1988 before she made this album.
Yeah, I mean, kind of understandable.
Yeah,
it's pretty unlikely you're going to have a hit at this point, but okay.
All right, and the last one is 650, as in $6.50. Not being obsessed with making money. In 1977, Bonnie kept her ticket prices at $6.50, which is about $34 today. Not bad. That's a reasonable amount for a decent acoustic show, which I assume she was doing at the time.
But then Ticketmaster charges you $75 in service fees.
All right, so that would take it up a little bit, yeah. And $6.50, that's nothing, right? Well, hell, that's downright expensive compared to the cost of joining our Patreon. That's right, for about the cost of a beer per month, which is typically all that we ever drink in a month. Anyway,
Alan's not on this week.
You can join us and all your friends in our exclusive members only section, where we've got some great bonus content like our song battles, where we duke it out and battle with each other over who has the best idea for what's the greatest song of the 80s, of the 90s. You can get all that, as well as keep up to date on everything coming out of the 1001 Album Complaints universe. So once you hear tonight's final vote, head on over to patreon.com/1001 album complaints, or just find the link in the episode notes. All right, when we last left Bonnie, she had just been dropped by her label. It's not looking good. Spoiler alert, you probably already know things are going to get worse. So she keeps gigging, though. She's burning through her own personal savings, paying her musicians out of pocket to keep playing. So she's losing money with each gig. Eventually, she has to drop her band, and at the same time, she broke up with her longtime boyfriend, Rob Fraboni, and she starts drinking, and drinking hard.
So before we move on, can you please tell me her boyfriend's name again?
Rob Fraboni.
Thank you.
That's not Freebo, the bass player?
It is not Freebo. There's a whole lot of those, though. All right, so she's broke, she's alone, she didn't save the world like she wanted to, and over the course of about 2 years, she gains 40 pounds. And at 36, she's hitting a rock bottom. And just at that point, Warner Brothers releases that other album that they shit on 2 years earlier that she re-recorded. So they'd never released it. They waited 2 years and then released it. They named it 9 Lives and released it to zero fanfare, zero publicity in September of 1986. Only music critics even knew that it was released, so she sinks even further into this depression. And to top it all off, on November 1st of 1986, Sippy Wallace dies on her 88th birthday, all but destroying Bonnie's dreams of producing a documentary about her. This is kind of like Flanders when everything's going wrong and he asks if the rubble burnt down when his house collapses. Like, how could it get any worse?
Except Flanders didn't gain 40 pounds from drinking.
Right. That's
I
substantial.
thought you were going to bring up her second worst album cover, which is the album cover to 9 Lives, which must have been a boosh from the record company.
All right, hang on. I didn't actually look at that.
It looks like a second grader's painting.
Oh, it's cute.
It's not cute
Yeah,
for
it's like
a grown person.
This is the cover of like a board book about cats.
Right. That would make perfect sense.
All right, but don't get too sad because there's a prince in her future, at least for a short time. So in December of 1986, Bonnie is still gigging. She's still doing tours. And she's long been a musician's musician. And she's playing at the Beverly Theater in LA, and a guy named Prince shows up at the show and falls in love with what he sees. So he gets in touch with her and says that he wants to work with her and release an album on his label. So they were supposed to get together in January of 87, but Bonnie has a skiing accident and has 2 months to heal. And during this time, she's really reevaluating all of her life's decisions. And it's during this time as well that she decides to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and has been sober ever since.
That's great.
Good for her. Yeah, that's huge. I sort of read that she, while rambling and being a tour dog all those years, was really into the rock and roll lifestyle and just kind of considered it a badge of honor as a woman to be able to drink these other dudes under the table, and eventually decided that was not a good life plan.
That's the right move.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, did you read this anecdote about how around this time when she had gained the weight, she was at a show and a fan in the front row passed her a note that the review said was one of the most audacious notes in the history of live shows. And it said, "What happened? You got fat. Maybe you should work out or something." Like, you passed that to the artist on stage at a show that you paid for. What is wrong with you?
Yeah, I mean, fuck.
But I'm reading it in part because apparently it motivated her. That's what I read, that was a motivating factor, that she snapped out of it, even though that person was clearly an asshole.
Yeah.
But also to bring up classic Chop anecdote where we were finishing our set in Davis, California, and somebody came up and dropped a note at my feet, and it just said, "Dear band, you suck."
I do remember that.
That was great.
Yeah,
but
what was your reaction? Did you turn around and say, "Play it loud"?
No, exactly. We were in the last chorus of the last song, and the band had some ups and downs performance wise, we can say. But as it happened that night, we had actually played played well. It was a good night for us. So I think we all kind of looked at it and just laughed. Like, we took it in the right mode. There were other nights where that might have created a car accident on the road or something, with us strangling each other. But anyway, people can be jerks.
But she can handle it. She was tough. Growing up with brothers, she always said that she had to play harder, literally, like when it came to football or wrestling. She was always the tough one just to survive with two brothers. So in April of that year, she gets together with Prince, and they record some initial stuff, but due to both Prince and her touring schedule, it just didn't work out. And it sounds like she wasn't too upset because he had just kind of pre-recorded some tracks and wanted her to just come in and sing over top of them, and she wasn't really into that. So it doesn't seem like there was a lot of love lost either way. So she wasn't too crushed.
You telling me Prince had a really strong idea of the aesthetic? Wanted to be in control? It's crazy.
All right, so she's cleaned herself up. She's lost a ton of weight. She's still playing random gigs at, folk festivals and campgrounds. So it's not, the height of her career. But in 1987, she winds up working with a guy named Don Was, who she had met the prior year in LA. And he fronted an avant-garde rock group called Was Not. I don't know if I'm saying that correct. Are you guys at all familiar with this band?
Well, I learned about them this week when I found out Don Waz's name. His birth name is Donald Fagenson. And I just,
I'm finally putting that together, Phil. That's now I understand.
Same here. I wasn't sure where you were going.
he's actually turns out to be a pretty hip guy. I think he like runs Blue Note now or something.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, he's like he's a very successful music industry individual.
Well, I looked over his production career, and it seems like he specializes in bands past their prime. Like he produced Stones records in the 90s and like Hootie and the Blowfish in the 2000s.
He found his niche.
Found a niche, sure, yeah. But what cracked me up is that every time he would be referenced, it would say Don Was, parentheses, of was, not was. It started to become a tongue twister.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he has like an admin on Wikipedia. He's in there changing his shit.
So that band, Was Not, they had a hit with the song Walk the Dinosaur. Do you guys remember that song?
Fuck, yes,
Everybody
absolutely.
walk the dinosaur. Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, yeah, I totally know that one, yeah.
But that meant that he was a successful producer. So Bonnie was thinking, hey, this might work. This guy's got a track record of proven hits. So he and Bonnie wind up working together in 1988 on a Disney tribute album where she sings a couple songs. And that's really where the spark of this album happens. So let's dive into this album a little bit.
Wait, quick side project, Phil.
Yeah.
We should do a whole album of just Disney covers. What do you say?
That could be really
Let's
fun.
get on this. Yeah, there's some hidden gems.
Yeah,
in there.
Arabian Nights crushes. I've always been a huge fan of Arabian. Ooh, there's some really choice stuff on the Encanto soundtrack if we're going to go into some new material.
It's not a Phil album, though, unless you say, we're going to do this in the style of. So Phil,
True.
in the style
I'm talking
of.
full reharmonization. Let's go Bill Evans on Someday My Prince Will Come type shit.
Sounds good.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm in. Well, let's spec that out. Like, we'll get an email
Yeah,
thread
get
going
right on that. Yeah.
Folks, write in to 1001 Album Complaints with your Disney recommendation songs. I'm sure it won't be any problem getting rights for Disney songs. So she and Don began working on material that would wind up on Nick of Time at Don's home studio. But at this point, she doesn't yet have a label. As was her MO, she never stopped playing, mainly because that's the only way she was making money. Don Was would go out and watch her perform, and most of her stuff was just her alone or her and a bass player. And the bass player at the time was this guy named Johnny Lee Schell. Don listened to her, he liked what he heard, and his approach was... And Tom has mentioned this before too. It's like, what makes a good song? If you can strip away everything, right? And you can sing just like the melody, then you've got a good song. And so similar, Don Was said that no matter how cool a track might eventually be, it had to work with just her alone. Now, in 1988, her manager, Danny Goldberg, helped get her signed with Capitol Records, but they were only willing to give her a new artist contract, which must have been real humbling. She's knocking on 40 and they give her the same contract that they would give to like a 17-year-old, like she's some kid. But that actually was kind of a benefit because there's very low expectations. She's coming out of a very low place. So it actually kind of worked out that there's not a ton of pressure on her. So Capitol signs her for $150,000. And just for some insane comparisons, that feels like a lot of money in 1989. But just for comparison, 3 years later, Janet Jackson would sign with Virgin Records for $32 million. No. I know that's apples and oranges, but it's still a fun comparison.
That's like Janet era Janet Jackson, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So now she and Don Was set out to make a record that wasn't trying to appeal to 20-year-old rockers or to fans of 1920s era blues singers. No Motown covers, no classic rock covers. She was aiming at baby boomers who, just like her, were looking middle-aged, dead in the eye, and like me. So maybe that's why it appealed to me a little bit. So a majority of this album was recorded over a week at Ocean Way Studios in Los Angeles in 1988, with a couple other sessions at Capitol Records in LA and also at Arlen Studios in Nashville. And you hear the album, you think, a week. Well, Bonnie is a seasoned veteran when it comes to performing. So they already had demos. She is used to rolling into a gig and playing with whoever is there. So they were going in and they were knocking out 2 songs a day. And the band would listen to a demo. They'd say, let's knock this one out. And they were done. So they got in, they got out in roughly a week. And Yeah.
And don't forget, they never had to be bothered to change the synth presets.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
Just turn it on and go. That's it. Just plug it in and go.
Song 1, setting 1. Song 2, setting 2.
It's just when you turn on the DX7, don't even touch it. Just start playing. What about the volume? Don't touch it. Just start playing. There were a ton of musicians on this album, too. I think 32 musicians credited in the liner notes, among which were Herbie Hancock, Graham Nash, David Crosby stepped by as well. But for the main players, a majority of the album was done with the occasional Beach Boys drummer, a guy named Ricky Fattar, bassist Hutch Hutchinson, and Johnny Lee Schell. And Johnny Lee Schell also played guitar, and of course, Bonnie doing her signature slide and guitar work along with piano.
I totally missed the Herbie Hancock thing. I missed that track entirely. Damn.
Yeah, I got to look at it.
He plays on one track.
Yeah. Which one is it?
Yeah. It's not on our list. It's
Okay.
I Ain't Gonna Let You Break My Heart.
Right. Yes, that is like the very jazzy ballad one. That makes sense. This album was a super success. And, her follow-up from this album was called Luck of the Draw, which had the smash hits Something to Talk About and I Can't Make You Love Me, which to this day is one of my favorite songs. An absolutely amazing song. But here we are, gents. What do you say we dive into some tunes on our deep dive tracks?
Let's do it.
All right, we are going to start off with the title track. It is track number 1 on
That clap is very aggressive.
Oh man. Yeah, it's got some production choices that definitely date it. But this is actually, maybe it's my second favorite song on the album, but this one got to me lyrically. I know it's nothing that hasn't been covered before, but as a 43-year-old guy, I listen to some of the stuff and it hits you kind of hard. And so this one, I think, tugged at the heartstrings, especially if she was trying to target baby boomers in 1990. I think this was the right move.
Well, targeting. She's writing about what she knows, which is reasonable and
Sure.
the right move. I think it's a reasonably well-written song, but it doesn't really stand out that much. This is my complaint about a lot of the material. It just doesn't really give her a chance to shine very often, either vocally or on the guitar. It just feels a little kind of middle of the road. So while I agree this is one of the better written tracks, it is not my favorite track. I don't know. Some aspects of these tones just really, they turn me off.
It's hard. Yeah, I get that. There are definitely some moments of keyboard cringe throughout this that almost ruin the song for me. Because you know me, like there's a fake Hammond on one of these songs.
Yeah. How'd that go over?
And it was like a knife in my heart. Because they're in the studio and they may have even set the synthesizer up on top of the Hammond. Like, no, just turn it on. It's right there. You could save this song. But anyway.
Well, so actually, guys, I was so bored by this song that I started just wandering through the internet, learning about other more interesting pieces of art with this namesake. Like, did you know that there is a D-list late 80s AC/DC song of the same name? There's also a William Shatner starring episode of The Twilight Zone.
Oh, that's probably dope.
Hell yeah.
Perhaps finally, there is a 1995 thriller starring Johnny Depp and Christopher Walken.
Yeah, those both sound pretty all right.
They're longer than this album. All right, just take that into mind. All right, you're going to
trying
save
to
time.
say the sentiment is a little bit trite. Okay.
Okay, I got you. Are you guys at all familiar with Michael Landau, the guitar player? He's one of these musicians kind of guitar player. He's been around forever. He's got some really cool live stuff, very jazzy, almost experimental. Anyway, I saw he was on this track, and it kind of makes sense. He's got a very unique style, and you can kind of hear that noodling on the electric guitar in the background. So if you have a chance, check out some Michael Landau.
I see how, too, speaking of that baby boomer nostalgic market, there is some kind of thread connecting the success of a Graceland a few years before this, or a year or two before this. With an album like this, they're kind of hitting on some of the same notes. I just think that's an unfavorable comparison to this album, unfortunately.
I like lyrically how I'm kind of a sucker for, it's kind of a country trope where the first 2 or 3 verses of a song will be sad. And then the final verse, it'll take the turn of phrase and turn it into like something happy. It's like, oh, well, I was actually waiting for love. I wasn't actually depressed. I was waiting for you, whatever it is. And this does that, right? The first couple verses are pretty down, and ends in kind of a resolving, hopeful way. Like, I did find love in the nick of time.
Yeah, it's like a gospel sort of thing. The way it resolves is gospel-y.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But you don't feel it because of the synth organ. It's got that dentist chair smell. Right. It's really hard to hard to get it over, get it on tape, but
you get that olfactory sense when you start listening to the song.
Yeah. Yeah, like I actually don't mind this song, and maybe a lot of these songs as standalones are actually kind of nice. Like she has a beautiful voice. I think we'll probably talk about the slide in a song or two, but like as a 40-minute dose, it's a large dose, so
Yeah.
I will say that I think I know there's not a ton of bangers on here, but I do feel the front half of the album moves a bit more than the back half. I feel like the back half, while it may be a little more bluesy or rock and rolly, it falls into the whole, like you said, Rob, the rock beat one and just like, all right, standard blues, boys, in A, go, 3, 4.
I thought this was the best song of the first side, but I actually kind of disagree. I thought the album opened up a little bit as it went, and we didn't catch a lot of these songs on the focus list, but some of the songs that I ended up liking the best were the ones where I felt she could shine as a vocalist the most. I do think she's a great vocalist. She reminds me a bit of Carole King on some of these tracks.
Sure.
But when there's a lot of extra elements in the mix, I don't feel like that served listening to her voice. So the tunes I like were more stripped down, either just her with a guitar or something like that. But all this kind of production just got in the way for me.
The Waz effect.
The Waz effect.
All right, let's move it along to the second song on our focus list. This one was a single. It was a hit. This is called Thing Called Love.
Don't have to humble yourself to me. I ain't your judge or your king. Baby, I ain't no Queen of Sheba. We may not even have our dignity. This would just be a powerful thing. Baby, we can choose, we ain't no amoeba. Are you ready for the thing called love? Don't come from me and you, it comes from up above.
I dug this. I could see why this was the hit. I think the video, it had Dennis Quaid in it. He was looking pretty hot, I'll be honest.
That is a good looking young Dennis Quaid. I did watch that, and I have to agree.
And now that I only look at women who are age appropriate and in their 40s, I thought Bonnie Raitt looked great. I thought she looked wonderful in the video. But let's talk about the song.
Okay. First of all, bravo. You managed to get Amoeba and Porcupine into a single song.
A hit no less.
I suppose that's an accomplishment, but baby, we can choose, we ain't no amoeba is a world-class forced rhyme.
Now, I can't argue with that. I can't argue with that, Rob.
I'll give it a compliment now. This is a John Hyatt song, I believe.
That's right. Yep.
I do think it improves on the John Hyatt version. It's got some pop to it. And one of the things I liked, one of the things I generally look for in music, I think you guys would agree, is when it does something a little unexpected, when there's something surprising about it. That first baby that comes in, that felt like a nice breath of fresh air.
I ain't your judge or your king. Baby,
The chord change.
Wasn't expecting that, didn't quite lead us into the transition that you maybe think it's going to do. It just kind of comes right back. So stuff like that, that's very nice. I do kind of see why it's a hit. That said, I was so bored by listening to this song that I started wandering through the internet, learning about other more interesting pieces of art with this same namesake. For instance, the 1993 rom-com that ended up being River Phoenix's last movie, also starring a pre-Speed Sandra Bullock. Or the Darkness hit from 2003 called I Believe in a Thing Called Love. Or Queen's crazy little thing called Love. I'm trying to tell you that this is a trite thing to call a song.
They should have called it Amoeba, like a fish song, or Porcupine Amoeba
song.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I really like the way the drums were recorded on this song. It's just, there's a lot of snare drum in the mix. Just like it sounds like there's a lot of like one mic. Also, her slide guitar is great,
actually
on this
audible
track in a very integrated way. Right? It's great.
Yeah, but there's like a solo section where you're expecting something a little more to happen. It was fairly underwhelming. I agree it's very tasteful and tasty, and she's definitely a good player.
It's designed to be like radio friendly for sure.
Which is just run the chord pattern once. Do something inoffensive.
Perhaps it's just not meeting with my expectations, and perhaps I'm being unfair for that reason. But I was expecting some bluesiness, and there's very little bluesiness here, as we pointed out. There's very little guitar emotion being rung.
Phil, you mentioned the live drum sound. Most of these songs were band in the room. Very few overdubs.
Well, and some of them would just have the DX7 clap sound, right? So the drummer would just, they'd be like, dude, DX7 at 88, like just play something, fill it in.
Put on that jet airplane noise. You remember that one? I was obsessed with that
Absolutely.
one. You put the pitch shift on the jet airplane. Ooh,
How
look
could you
out.
forget that? How could you? Yeah, of course.
All right, we're going to move on. The next song on the focus list is called Cry on My Shoulder.
I know it's hard sometimes, and things seem larger than they are. But if you need to tell someone, that's what I'm here for. Cry on my shoulder, I'll help you rise above. Cry on my shoulder, my love.
Is that a rain stick?
Oh, no.
What are you doing?
I liked this song. This was probably,
When did you like this song?
I'll tell you,
Speaking of mixing problems, this is the one with Crosby and Nash on it, and somehow they still get buried in the mix. Like, what are you doing?
so the first time I listened to this song, I was in our basement where I have my studio monitors, the subwoofers, all this stuff. I listened to it really loud. And what stuck out to me and what maybe sold the song was the high note that she hits at 145. I thought she sounded great. Now you're making me second guess all my decisions, you bastards.
I'm sorry. I'm coming in hot.
All good, all good.
This felt like I've had the time of my life without the funky kick in.
This also had the Doogie Howser keyboard sound.
Yeah,
Right.
this has big time Diggy.
man.
And it is a beautiful, she really does blast. I mean, she has a beautiful voice. This
Yeah.
has been,
Agreed. And-
touched on. She sounds amazing.
And great control. But
Yeah.
I think you can get that as a read between the lines thing. And you can get that she's a very tasty guitar player who's been in the studio and is comfortable in the studio and plays to what the song needs, I think all that's there, but none of it is a showcase for her. And that's sort of my problem with it. The other album I keep thinking of this week that we covered on the podcast was Tina Turner's Private Dancer. Kind of a similar story of a person who had a previous career, and then this is a career resurgence around the age of 40, an unlikely resurgence
Right.
with the Tina Turner hit. But everything on that record, while it still had that sheen of 80s cheese, it was just really built around the skill set of Tina Turner. The excitement, the energy. Believe me, I wish nothing more than we were sitting here praising Bonnie Raitt. I totally believe that she is a great artist and that she's a great human being, and she's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think she deserves her spot there. But based on my admittedly limited listening to her catalog, this doesn't feel like what is great about her. This record does not feel, I feel like it's a miss on the list. It's not really reflective of her.
The Ocarina of Time soundtrack vibe, map vibe isn't.
And we've seen before that Robert Dimery likely sends his minions out to figure out what albums. And so they probably
Sure.
said, Bonnie Raitt, what sold the most? Or what was her big standout album?
I don't think there are other Bonnie Raitt records on the
No,
list.
they're
This
not.
is the only one.
They're not, and that's why I feel so, conflicted about where this is heading.
Ooh.
Because
So excited.
I don't know. We've debated how the list was made or if it was even made with this level of care. But there's something to be said for records that sell a lot and thus create influence because a lot of people heard them. I get that. But then there's also something to be said, and I think what we're trying to do here is talk objectively about what, once the dust has settled in particular, what really had the biggest effect.
All right, we're going to move things along. The next song on our list, and I'm laughing because I have a funny story for this one. This one is called Have a Heart.
Shut up. Don't lie to me. You think I'm blind, but I've got eyes to see. Hey, mister, how do you do? Oh, pardon me, I thought I knew you. Would you stand back, baby, 'cause I want to get a better look. The big man who couldn't handle a little bit of love you took. Hey, hey, have a heart. Hey, have a heart.
All right, so I hadn't thought that I had ever really heard anything off this album. And when this song came on for the first time, I burst out laughing because I remember as a child sitting in the car with my sisters, and the opening line, as you heard, is, "Hey, shut up." And we all started cracking up like, what the hell is this song? This is hilarious. Play it again. Hey, shut up. So I had a hard time listening to this seriously because I just went back there as a 9-year-old just cracking up. So yeah, that's my.
You sure
my
you
quick-
didn't hear it on a Toyota-thon Valentine's Day special or an ad for Carnival Cruise Lines or something? Listen, attention, white people, stop trying reggae, okay?
Yeah, to me, this sounds like the second or third song in the end music of the Cool Running soundtrack. Like, the credit roll.
Yo, totally. Oh
Yeah,
my God.
like it doesn't have enough energy to be the first song. It's got to be like the second song as they get deep into the credits.
Once they get to the gaffers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So this was my low point on the album. I don't know if it was anybody else's. I like that it's sparse. I don't know. The delay on her voice is pretty rough. That terrible chimey synthesizer. It's rough.
Yeah, I think this is a valid low point. I read this was intended originally for Huey Lewis because I think the songwriter's brother was in the news. But either he passed on it or it never made it to him.
Okay.
Good for him, I guess.
And another guitar solo that I use in air quotes that just doesn't even exist. I'd rather have you run the chord pattern than make Bonnie sound like a shitty guitar player.
They make her sound bad on guitar, but they definitely don't showcase her slide playing. I think, something to talk about is the only one that even sort of hints at it, right?
Right.
It's very popified.
It's also too long. I think this goes on for 5 minutes. The chorus, the super chorus is like, I don't know, a minute and a half. It just way too long. So this is my low point, gents. And that's going to take us into the next song. This is going to be the last one on our focus list. This one, and I'm shuddering because this has that organ or fake organ.
I was going to say,
Ozzy in the booth there, dial me up that Seinfeld bass tone. So I actually think this is one of the better written songs. I think the chorus is actually pretty solid, but yeah, some of the production touches here are cringeworthy, but she gets to show off at least a little bit of her vocal style and her control on the mic. There's this part where she kind of goes up for a high, and it feels very tight, very controlled. My complaint is more about the arrangements, not about her, and not even really about the songwriting, which I think the songs could have been elevated from their position here.
I'll never be able to hear past this like ice tube setting on the keyboard. Like I don't know what else. That's what I would call that. I would call that ice tubes.
Yes.
Be somewhere in my bells.
I was going to say I can't hear past "Dirty Laundry" by Don Henley, which was released. Released like 8 years earlier. I was like, oh, it's a little close. I know it's a banger. It's a banger. Yeah. All right, well, we're going to wrap it up there, and we're going to now cast our votes. It's the moment you've been waiting for this whole broadcast. does Bonnie Raitt's Nick of Time. Do you need to hear that before you die? We're going to throw it over to Phil first.
Well, it's a tough call. I really do respect Bonnie Raitt and her career and her work in general. There's actually a Bonnie Raitt show near me in about 6 weeks, I've learned.
Thanks to Spotify.
And like, yeah. And
right.
I might go. Like, it sounds like a nice evening, right? An evening with Bonnie Raitt. Man, good point, man. That Love Letter sounds just like Dirty Laundry. Both of which are like pretty.
I shouldn't have mentioned it. Damn it. All right.
In this case, I've got to actually give like a strong yes to Dirty Laundry, which is a pretty, like, if I had to compare those songs. As tough as it is, I'm going to pass on Nick of Time by Bonnie Raitt. I'm going to give that a no. I think you can spend your life without listening to this. But I do think Bonnie Raitt is fantastic. I especially think her stuff from, what is it, I guess the late 60s and early 70s, is really fantastic and really is amazing, sort of real deal Americana.
All right. That's a no for Phil.
No.
All
That's
right.
a no. It's the kindest no I could give.
Rob, what do you got?
Yeah, I also have to give it a no. And as I indicated throughout this podcast, I felt conflicted about it all week because I do think Bonnie Raitt as an artist is certainly worth listening to. I agree. I would go see her live. I bet that would be a ton of fun. She's clearly accomplished a hell of a lot in her career. And actually, my favorite song we didn't touch on was the song Too Soon to Tell. I thought that was a really cool song, actually. The highlight of the record for me. But I can't in good conscience tell you must listen to this. Essential is just too high a bar. And I encourage you to explore some of her other work earlier or later, but not this.
All right, that's 2 no's. Unfortunately, my vote does not count. However, I will give you my vote, which I don't think it's going to be a surprise. I'm going to say yes. And it's mainly, I was just hoping to stack the deck to get more people to listen to Bonnie Raitt because I absolutely love her. While this is not the best material, I think it's an important album just from a redemption story of somebody truly hitting their stride at nearly 40 years old. And again, maybe it's just me and my own midlife crisis. So, but I will agree with Rob and say that I think you should go listen to some of her other stuff. The album I was talking about is called The Lost Broadcast. Anyway, all right, so Bonnie, I am sorry to say it, but you have been voted down for your 1989 album, Nick of Time. But that's all right. We're going to keep moving along here. We're going to throw it over to Rob because he has got his hand in the mailbag, and he's going to let us know what y'all have been thinking.
Thanks so much, Adam. Yes, I have some great epistles to read to you, and I wanted to say we've been getting some great feedback on the Abbey Road episodes. We, of course, really enjoyed doing that. I'm glad y'all enjoyed listening to them. I am going to collate that feedback next week and read it to you then and there. But here's some other stuff we got. We have a listener called Oren who writes, subject line is, not only old heads listen to you guys. He says, hey guys, I'm 18.
What?
And I've been enjoying your podcast. So be glad to know that you at least have one cool young listener.
Who is most definitely not listening to this album, by the way.
Good to know. Yeah, if you made it this far, Oren, congratulations. Extra congratulations. Keep up the good work. And also, there's a call out for Phil coming. Keep up the good work. And also, Phil, just so you know, you're wrong. About what, you ask? The Royal Scam is not Steely Dan's best. It's definitely Countdown to Ecstasy.
Oh, shit.
For 3 reasons. The band sounds tighter, the melodies are more memorable, and I often find them running through my head much more than Royal Scam, and Countdown feels like it has a better edge to it.
Interesting
What say you,
points.
Phil?
Damn.
Yeah, those are great points. I do think Countdown to Ecstasy. I do think the band cooks pretty hard. Now, that's a great point about the edge. It does have it has a bandness that is different. I'm sticking with Royal Scam. For me, it just blew me away. You know, when I was, 18, 19. But these are great points by, what was it? What was the
Oren.
listener's name?
Oren.
Warren.
Nice.
Yeah. So,
Oren.
Oren.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they're both great records, of course. But, learning what we learned on that Can't Buy a Thrill episode, or at least this wasn't clear to me before I did that research, that you're right. Countdown is probably the last one where they really were that original core set of members. And I think Scam might have been the one where they started branching out to way more studio session guys, right? Anyway, thank you for that, Oren. I wanted to wait until Phil was here to read that to him, of course. And we have one more that mentions Phil, because believe it or not, a lot of our emails mention Phil. So Eric writes in,
Why is this?
I just wanted to say that I'm a big fan of the show. I love the in-depth backstory you give each artist and the way you nerd out on the small details about songwriting, recording, arrangement, and instrumentation. I myself have been a musician and a lover of music my whole life, and I've developed a reputation around my friends and family as a music snob for my strong opinions on what makes for a good tune. Thus, your show is very relatable to me, and as a bonus, makes me laugh as well. And I'll just editorially add, has made you even more insufferable, I'm sure, to those around you. We know this from direct personal experience. On a last note, Phil doesn't sound like Badger. He sounds exactly like Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I identify with that a little more, I think. I like to eat out of dumpsters. I don't know.
Yes, that one resonates. Us being from the Philadelphia area generally.
Totally.
So that one makes sense. Listeners, cast your vote. Is it Badger or is it Charlie? We're open to either one. And if you want to tell us what's on your mind or what other minor celebrity that our friend Phil sounds just like, please let us know by writing us an email at 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com.
Nice. And Rob, we're going to keep it right back with you for our album pick. So whip out the Albinator. Let's see what we got going.
Ah, yes. The Albinator has come into my possession recently. It's a little old, but it's recently been hitting the gym and it's ready. It's back in spinning shape. So we're going to spin that wheel and see what comes up as our homework for next week. Without further ado, next week we will be listening to, the band is called Churches with a V instead of a U, and the album is called The Bones of What You Believe.
I've
definitely not heard that.
Never heard any of this. I feel like I've seen the name Churches with the V. For some reason, that just sticks out, but don't know that I've ever heard a note of this.
I feel like this is going to be a tough one to Google, that autocorrect is going to have a lot of sway over what I type in here. I think this is a more modern band, but I don't know much about them either, but I'm excited to get into it.
You're going to suffer from the same thing I did with White Denim, which is nothing but shopping pages coming up when you're searching for research. But anyway, all right, there you go, folks. Listen to. The band is Churches. The album is The Bones of What You Believe. That is your homework for this upcoming week. So I want to thank you for hanging out with us tonight for 1001 Album Complaints. I'm Adam.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Rob.
I should have come up with something. I can't make you boosh me. Oh, that sounds a little sexy. Anyway.
Sounds disgusting.